Okay, let's open up with a word of prayer, and then we will we'll recap what we've talked about a little bit, and then we will get into tonight's lesson of emotional intelligence. So, dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you. We thank you for each individual that's here, excited to learn, ready to come and continue to grow as leaders. We thank you that they're willing to give up their time so that we can serve your children better. Our goal ultimately isn't necessarily self-improvement. Our goal isn't necessarily to just make ourselves better for the sake of making ourselves better. It's so that we can reach more kids, we can have a greater impact in your kingdom. There's no more important job that we have as leaders than to minister to children. So I just pray this evening that we would be able to enrich ourselves and at the same time improve our ministry to kids. So we just thank you. We praise you in your precious name. Amen. Amen. Well, for those of you that don't know me, no, you should know me. So this is the third one of these that we've had. The first one we met, we went through different leadership theories, and we settled in on a leadership theory of servant leadership as the style of leadership that we're trying to go from, that basically starts from the premise that you are a leader because you desire to serve first. Not that you look at leadership as an opportunity to acquire power, but it's because you desire to serve. And I think children's ministry is full of wonderful people with that same philosophy, because we really are helping an aspect of society that cannot give back. Kids don't have the ability to pay you for what you do. So obviously you are involved in children's ministry because of the desire to help kids, which is a wonderful thing. And it's really why servant leadership is the basis. So we use that as the foundation for what we do in children's ministry. So we exist as a children's ministry to serve parents and serve kids. And we use that as our decision-making matrix. So if somebody comes and they have a question, we try and be Lowe's over Home Depot. And if you remember that analogy, Home Depot is built for the professional warehouse contractor. If you ask a question, they're going to point you that direction. But at Lowe's was built for women. So if you ask a question, they're going to walk you to the aisle. It's brighter, it's cleaner. We want to be Lowe's, not Home Depot. We want to do everything we can to serve our children, to serve our parents as leaders in children's ministry here at Bethel. So that's where we started from. And then last time we talked about the foundational element of leadership, which I want to go ahead and review the core leadership beliefs that we shared. The first one, and this is where we're spending a lot of time right now, is the heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. Everything in leadership flows from what is inside of you. It flows from the good stuff, it flows from the bad stuff, it flows from the mediocre stuff. It doesn't matter. If there's something inside of you, it is going to affect your leadership. And so this is the foundational element. And last time we actually, without jumping the gun too much, last time we went through and had everyone do a series of life graphs that helped to identify pivot points in their life of when there was a positive or a negative change. And if you weren't here for that week, that's okay. If you go to spencerclick.com, which is my blog, you can find that lesson. We did video that one. We didn't video the first one. We videoed the last one. And the spencerclick.com, it's got a leader's heart training on that, which would be helpful for this. So that's the first element. The heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. The second core leadership belief that we're functioning from is that the heart of the leader sets the tone for the organization. So if you have a grumpy leader, you have an upset leader, you have a mad leader, you're going to have a tone in the organization that is not welcoming, it's uninviting. If you have a gracious, a grateful, a generous leader, you're going to have that same kind of tone within the organization. It's like Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is a wonderful example. The Christian principles that the Cathys have built the organization on, it filtered down into everything that they do. They want to serve their patrons. They're not just there looking to make money. They are there trying to serve their community. Obviously, they are a company. They're trying to make money. But that's not their sole purpose. And so that filters down because the tone of the leader has set, the heart of the leader has set the tone for the organization. It has determined what is important to them as a company. And that's the same thing that we're trying to do as an organization. So that's why we start with the heart of the leader, because understand that the heart affects the tone. And then the tone of the organizational culture directly impacts the way people experience the organization. And organizational culture flows out of the tone. Okay, so if you have a paranoid leader, it's going to create a culture within your organization of paranoia. Because you don't know what you can trust, you don't know what you can believe, you're not sure. And eventually, that filters down into the way you interact with individuals. And here in children's ministry, or here at Bethel, for lack of a better term, our customers. Who's our customers? Our customers are kids, but we have a second one too. Parents. It's parents. And if we have a rule-based organization, it's going to be rigid. It is going to be rigid, uninviting. One of the things that we try and be very intentional on is being welcoming to first time, second time, third time guests. We want them to know that they can come. And how many of you know that guests don't always know the rules, right? So if somebody comes and says, hey, I'd like my second grader to go into my fourth grader's class because it's their first time here, they're a little nervous, is that okay? The rules say no, right? But since we're trying to be welcoming, what do we say? Absolutely. Absolutely. We want them. Now, in kindergarten, we have the same way. But if they say, I want my 2-year-old to go with my 6th grader, no. Yeah, we're going to have to draw the line there for safety's sake. Because the 2-year-old is going to get lost with the older kid, and the older kid's just going to be, Godzilla in the preschool room. So we do have some balance in there, but we want to create an environment that's welcoming, and that is the philosophy. So this is the organizational culture that we want to create because it impacts the way people experience what we do. Because, people might forget a good experience quickly, but they don't forget a bad experience. Heather and I went to a pizza place. Have you been to the new theater in City Center, at Paragon? Oh my gosh! If you're gonna go to a movie theater, that's the one to go. The seats are electric recliners, footrests, lay back. Don't go if you're the kind that falls asleep in movies. But there was a pizza place next door to it called My Pie. And in Nashville, there's a place called My Pie that Heather and I went to and really enjoyed. So we went to this place. Yeah, not the same company. Not the same My Pie. And so we had a bad experience. They didn't even have high chairs. So how many of you know, if you have kids and they don't have high chairs, what's that say? You don't want me to come. Yeah. So it affected the way we experience the organization. And here's why that's so important, is because the way people experience the organization directly impacts the organization's ability to fulfill its mission. And ultimately, that is our goal as an organization, is to fulfill the mission. We want to reach children and their parents. We want to grow the kingdom of God. And if we create an environment that is unwelcoming, that is too rigid, that if we create this atmosphere, we are going to be unable to fulfill our mission. But it all comes back to the same spot, the heart of the leader. If you lead out of anger, if you lead out of the desire for power and authority, or if you lead as somebody that is hurt, it's going to leak out of you. You guys have heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people. It's really true that when we get pressed, when we get pushed, when we get challenged, we all of a sudden, what's on the inside is what comes out. That's why we spend so much time in this. We're going to spend so much time talking about the heart of the leader, because that is the primary factor that we need to pay attention to. So all 4 of those make sense to you? We'll eventually, get to the other 3, but we're going to spend time in the heart of the leader, because I think that is, for every leader, the most foundational and most important element of leadership. You guys know I'm in a doctoral program right now, and what I'm focusing on in my studies is servant leadership and organizational leadership. Organic leadership. Organic leadership focuses on the developmental process of leaders. And I really want to see that integrated into what we do as to helping people recognize transitions and changes in their leadership development, because leadership is a developmental process. So that's why I've decided to focus that way. And that's what we're doing here, is to help start laying the foundation for creating organizational change, leadership change in you, and help you to walk through transitions. So let's, I think that gives us a good ability to understand where we're starting from. This just builds off the heart of the leader. It's kind of the foundation for what we're doing theologically. David shepherded them with integrity of heart, and with skillful hands he led them. The heart cannot be taken for granted. Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. And we moved into the topic of self-leadership. Now, understand, we're just kind of doing a recap here. This is why we're shooting through it pretty quick. We're talking about the topic of self-leadership in there, and there are 3 disciplines and where we're at in self-leadership: self-awareness, self-management, and self-development. And really, tonight we're going to spend in self-awareness. We're going to talk about self-awareness. How many of you have ever worked for somebody that can walk into a room, blow it up, walk out, come back 2 minutes later, and not understand why everybody's upset? Yeah. Somebody with low self-awareness has no idea the way that they affect other people. And one of the primary reasons for that is a very low level of emotional intelligence. And that's what we're talking about tonight, is emotional intelligence. So tonight we're talking about self-awareness. And self-awareness just kind of boils down to being knowledge, mindful, alert, conscious, vigilant, self-knowing, self-mindedness. These are elements of self-awareness. I'm going to skip this slide here. We're going to hop a couple slides. Here we go. Now, if you remember, I had you guys do, when we met this was in April, right? When we did the life graphs, How many of you, since that time, have really thought into that life graph? I mean, how many of you found that a helpful activity? Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it really identified some things in your life that, every time I've done this with other leaders, we find that what it does is it reveals pivot points in life. And you'll find that that's very important as we continue to talk tonight about self-awareness, self-management, self-control, and emotional intelligence. Because, there's a lot of folks that they avoid or they lack an understanding of their emotional impact on others. But they also have an incredibly poor ability to read a room on the emotional atmosphere. I can't. I'm blanking on who I'm thinking about, but I know. Oh, it's one of my friends somewhere else. Since when you record things, you really become very more careful about what you're saying. You don't want to upset anybody. I'm being emotionally intelligent. So I have a friend that they could walk into a room that would be somber. Somebody's cat just died, and you're all sitting there with the body in the middle of the room, and just you're being quiet, and they'd walk in, see everyone. Well, hey, why is everybody so long-faced? What's going on? Do you know somebody like that? They have no ability to read a room at all. That's a low level of emotional intelligence. And that's really where the life graphs helps us to determine events that have set our direction, that have set the way we relate to people, and set how we view the world. As we talk about, how many of you had a chance before we changed the Bethel Connect process, how many of you had the opportunity to go through Bethel 401? One of the things that we talked about in 401 was conflict. And in conflict, the challenge that we face sometimes, that one of the levels of conflict is a developmental issue. When something is a developmental issue, you're dealing with something that is below the surface and happened years and years and years before you met that person. It's not your fault. It's not anything you did, but it exists because of something that occurred in that person's life years ago. And I think the life graphs really help to identify those things. It's like those that grew up in the Depression. That era really greatly affected. How many of you had grandparents that grew up in the Depression era? The way they could manage resources and money, and the way they approached everything, really, it was really significant, wasn't it? And it's because of that developmental experience that even 30, 40, 50 years later, it was impacting how they did things. And there's things like that in our lives that are subtle, that we might not be aware of, that we might not have identified, that we might not even know about until we're pressed. And this is where emotional intelligence comes into play. So let's understand this as we move through that. Leadership is a developmental process. Leadership is a developmental process. So we all start at a point. And I function from the belief that leadership is a set of learned behaviors. You know, that's one of the things that we did talk about that first week on what your philosophy of leadership was. Do you believe leadership is something that you're born into, something that's only for a select few, or is leadership something that can be learned? You know, and it's really always interesting. Those that feel that they're natural born leaders have a tendency to think that it's for a select few. But we function from a different perspective, especially as Christians, that believe that God's grace is available to anyone, that we believe that leadership is open to anyone. All you have to do is desire to grow, desire to improve. Now, don't get me wrong, some people start with some natural abilities that make it easier to be in leadership, but ultimately everyone has that opportunity to grow, and it's just a matter of where we're at on that spectrum. I'm excited about the fall. How many of you have been coming to deeper classes? Anybody coming on Wednesday nights? I've been teaching a spiritual parenting class. Thomas has been teaching a finance class, and I hear it's the best one we've got.
Best one.
So it's really been good. Pastor Glenn is teaching his redemptive leadership class. Have you enjoyed that?
Yes.
So the first 4 core leadership beliefs, you probably recognize those because that's from redemptive leadership.
And Pastor Spencer, and the thing I like about it is when you walk out of there, it's like you're thinking about it all week.
Yeah.
Like, wait a minute, am I doing that? So I understand exactly.
Yeah. So we're going to continue doing those classes in the fall. Thomas is going to keep on teaching money. Yeah. I don't know if he agreed to that or not. He might have just been voluntold there. But I'm going to teach a class in the fall. It's going to be a 10-week class on the critical journey. And it's one of those things that we're going to incorporate into these sessions, but it talks about the stages of life in Christian discipleship. And it's really impactful in the leadership development process. So I'll go ahead and recruit you now if you want to come. Wednesday nights, 7 o'clock, starting in September. But it's going to be it's going to be wonderful. So, did you have a question? Oh, that's all I hand.
Oh, no.
I'm very. See, like I said this morning, yeah, I figured. Like I said this morning, if a child raises their hand in a time when it's not a question, I won't call on you. But adults, I have a tendency to trust you. Not everyone. So I'd encourage you, if you want to be a part of that, the critical journey, wonderful. Even if you want to get the book and read it beforehand, I know a few of you have read it before. It's a wonderful, wonderful process. But it gets us thinking of leadership as a different form, because sometimes we want to think of leadership as we see like Billy Graham now, or we see him like 10 years ago when he was vibrant, or we see even President Obama, or we see other leaders. We see where they're at now, and we think, man, they must have just been born that way. Or we don't even pay attention to the fact that they didn't start where they're at. You know, if you read the history of Lincoln, he lost multiple elections. He failed several businesses. Before he became president, there was a long journey in front of there, and sometimes it's hard to see that. It's like me being here at Bethel. I've had friends that are like, "Oh man, yeah, I'd love to be able to get at a church the size of Bethel and the opportunities you have." And I said, "Yeah, it's been a great opportunity," and they're like, "Yeah, it must be. You have no idea what it's like for the small guys." And I said, "Yeah, the 15 years that I spent at churches of 75 to 200, yeah, I haven't forgotten it that much." There's that years of process and development as a leader, so we can't lose sight. So here's the reason I want to point this out, is because as we're talking tonight about emotional intelligence and we're talking about the development, it's so easy to get overwhelmed when you start to look at everything that can be in front of you. You can go, "Man, I've got so far to go. I've got so far to go." That's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. It's just understanding that the spectrum, you might be a 2 and you want to grow to a 9. you might be an 8 and you want to go to a 10. There's a lot of big difference there, but there's still a lot of work for both of them. So don't look at the distance that you have to go. Look at the reality that you're moving forward and you're designed to that. And understand that this developmental process is open for everybody as long as we desire to move forward, right? All right, amen? Okay, all right, that's kind of a quiet amen. So, you guys work with kids, right? All right, so emotional intelligence. That's what we're talking about tonight. Emotional intelligence is really the ability to manage and recognize your emotional state as well as the emotional state of those around you. I've already given a couple of examples, but how many of you know when you're in a bad mood? Do you always know when you're in a bad mood? Or does it take somebody to go, hey, you doing all right?
Sometimes.
Did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? So we have the children's ministry coaching thing that I do with my friend Jim Weidman. We run everyone through a personality test. It's called a PEP test, and you come out as one of the one of 4 elements. And it's the Path Elements Profile by Lori Beth Jones. And the 4 elements are earth, wind, water, and fire. So it doesn't matter what personality test I take. I come out whichever one is the loudest, most dominant, aggressive one. So if it's like red, orange, green, yellow, I'm red. If it's like lion, bear, otter, golden retriever, I'm the lion. If it's earth, wind, water, or fire, you want to guess? Fire. So that's my personality. But I'm also, in that one, I'm a fire wind. They're almost equal. So I am driven, excited, energetic, but I also like to have fun. So Pastor Dan was a water wind. Pastor Joel was an earth water. Heather is an, are you earth water or water earth? Yeah, she's one of those two. So Pastor Joel and Pastor Dan, Pastor Joel and Heather have very similar personalities. So. Yeah. But here's one of the things, and this is why emotional intelligence is so important. My personality as such is that I am still willing to say things that Heather is not willing to think. Because my personality is much more comfortable with confrontation. I'm more comfortable with just saying what's there. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the water. Water just goes with the flow. Water just goes with the flow. They just, whatever's easiest, let's do that. Fire, not so much. Not so much. So I have to be aware of emotional intelligence, not because all conflict needs to be avoided, but because there's a healthy way to approach conflict. And so depending upon what personality you have, really can dictate what level of emotion you need to be aware of. So for me, I typically have to be aware of the aggressive emotions. So anger, excited, drive, push, whatever. Those are things I have to be aware of. If you're a water, you might have to be aware of fear, nervousness, complacency. There are different emotions that you have to be aware of. Earth has a tendency to be incredibly stubborn because they don't like to move. They want to stick to their plan. So there's all sorts of emotions that you can get in there that you need to be aware of. So this is why emotional intelligence is so important for us as leaders, because how many of you know there's a mix of us here? And our goal is to work together for the same purpose, right? So if we're all unaware of who we are as leaders, inevitably we're going to run into a whole lot of conflict, right? A whole lot of conflict. The other element about emotional intelligence is so very important. Rick Warren has a wonderful training session that he does for their small groups. And in that training session, he talks about every small group has somebody that is an EGR. And that EGR stands for extra grace required. Extra grace required. And he said, if you can't identify who it is in your group that needs extra grace, it might be you. Yeah, if you can't find that person, it might be you. But here's the reality. The church, we have people that come in that want to serve, that have wonderful hearts, but they have so many years of past hurt. They also have so very few appropriate boundaries for sharing. So they are willing to tell you their life story when you say, "Hi, how are you?" And so all of a sudden, before you know it, you have gotten a litany of the last 45 years of their life. Emotional intelligence helps you to balance appropriate sharing in the right place to be. And this is an important thing for us as leaders, because if we can't recognize this, we will find ourselves using it in our classroom with children as a counseling session, where we're asking our 5th graders to counsel us, or our 3rd graders to, or our 1st graders, we're asking them, so what would you guys do here? I'm having a conflict with my supervisor at work. Have you tried coloring them a picture? I mean, that's the counseling a 1st grader gives you. So, but we laugh because we all know it's true, don't we? Am I done? No, sorry. We all know that it's true that there are those that do not have the emotional awareness to understand appropriate sharing, right? Yeah, it's a reality of emotional intelligence. So, we kind of run into two different kinds of leaders when we're talking about emotional intelligence. We have those with a high IQ. They tend to be critical, condescending, inhibited. They're very controlled in what they do. They're not very, I think demonstrative would be a good word. They are uncomfortable with intimacy, i.e. they're not very good at relationships. They just want to work with you. They don't want to know how your weekend went. They don't really care if your dogs pass away. They don't want to know your life. They want to know what kind of productivity they can get out of you. This is a challenge. And then they're also fairly emotionally bland. They don't necessarily thrive on experiencing life together. How many of you have worked with individuals like this? How many of you currently work with it? No, just... yeah, Reverend Dylan's gonna... Yeah. So, the other side of the coin is somebody with a high emotional IQ. So somebody with a high emotional IQ, they tend to be poised, outgoing, committed to people and causes, sympathetic and caring, and comfortable with themselves. And this is probably one of the biggest elements to somebody with a high emotional intelligence, is that they are comfortable with who they are. They are confident, not necessarily arrogant per se, but they are comfortable. They understand that they have ups and downs. They understand the waves with which they go. They understand what helps them, what hurts them. They understand the mornings when they wake up on the wrong sides of bed. They can read those. But you have to have a high level of emotional IQ. And here's why this is so important. This is why it's so important, is that your actual IQ, it only contributes to about 20% of success in life. How smart you are really only contributes to about 20%. We were talking about this in the office at one point, about a friend of ours that had recently made a job transition, not voluntarily. And with the reality we realize is that you can be likable and low in productivity and still do okay. And you can be high in productivity and a little less likable and do okay. But you can't be unlikable and low in productivity. You're just not going to have a job. You're not going to have a job. But there's all sorts of people that they're wonderfully intelligent, but they have a hard time keeping a job because they can't relate to people. They can't connect with people. They can't talk to people. So IQ will get you so far. They will jump around to a new job about every 2 to 3 years at best. It doesn't work. How many of you? I don't do well with condescension. If somebody tries to talk down their nose at me, it just doesn't work well. There's certain things that rub me raw quicker than others. That's one of those ones. Because intelligence will take you so far, but if you can't relate to people, people don't really care. They don't really care. That's why emotional intelligence is so important. We're gonna abbreviate it to EI. Emotional intelligence enables you to manage your emotions and leverage them to reach your goals. Now we're going to understand the fourth core leadership belief is that the way people experience an organization directly affects its ability to fulfill its mission. The way people experience you directly affects your ability to reach your goals. If you're always grumpy, if you're always upset, if you're always mad, you're not going to have a great team that wants to work with you. If you never take time to stop and talk to people, and people aren't going to really, they're not going to spend time with you. That's part of the reason why on Sunday mornings, I spend a lot of my time just walking around and saying hi to classes. It's because I want people to know we value them on part of the team and that they are important to what we do. Because it's one of those things that I believe as a leader, we have tons of teachers that are wonderful at instructing classes. But one of my roles as the executive pastor of Family Ministry is to help build a team. And if you don't feel like you're part of that team, you're really not going to have any desire to stick around and be long term. So understanding my emotions, because sometimes I would rather just sit down in the sanctuary or sit in the break room and talk to a couple people. But understanding my emotions helps me to see my role and help leverage that role into reaching goals. Emotional intelligence is the capacity that helps you navigate the social world. We talked about that just a few moments ago. The ability to read a room, of the emotional state of a room, the ability to read body language, the ability to understand when somebody posts something passive aggressive on Facebook, is recognizing that it might not necessarily be your issue, it might be their issue, and that is Facebook is a really interesting window into people's lack of emotional intelligence. The things that people are willing to post on Facebook it's really fascinating sometimes to see things that people put out there, and then they get upset when other people comment negatively on, oh, I don't know, the tirade that they went on where they were complaining about everything in the world, and it involved their aunt, and their aunt saw it and says, you know, honey, I don't think that's okay. We've seen this, actually, we've seen it too many times. Emotional intelligence, there's so many things that run into my head. I talked about this morning, actually. Our feeling brain it can be fickle, can't it? But if we just do thinking, we miss the relational element of life, right? Now, sometimes it's easier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right thing. Here's the great thing, is that emotional intelligence makes you a better leader and a better person. Because when you have a high level of emotional intelligence, you're not just emotionally vomiting on everybody around you. I know it's kind of a graphic description, but it's really one of my preferred phrases for those that don't have appropriate boundaries. They just come and throw up on you. And it's like, how you doing? And you walk away going, okay, well, I'm sorry I asked that question. So, yeah. So if I ask how you're doing, understand, I actually mean how are you doing? So it's been surprising to some folks here on Sundays. How are you doing? And they're like, yeah, I'm doing all right. Okay, that didn't really sound all right. So, and I'll pursue it. And if they're not willing to have that conversation, I'm not going to force them to. But if I ask how you're doing, I actually mean it. So if you're one that vomits emotionally, and I've identified that, I might actually not ask you. So that's one of those things I should have not said, right? But
I can't work with this guy.
The reality is that
He starts asking you, you know, do you?
or if I only ask you like once every 3 or 4 weeks, since I've had a chance to build back up. So emotional elements have 4 components, depending upon what scale of emotional intelligence you want to look at. There's multiple views on it. The one we're going with has 4 elements. The first one is self-awareness or self-control. Self-awareness / self-control. It involves both of those. Self-awareness, self-control. Empathy. Social expertness. I'm pretty sure that's a made-up word. Expertness. Maybe not. Motivating ourselves. These 4 elements combine to determine what level of emotional IQ you have, what level of emotional intelligence you possess. So let's talk a little bit about what each one of these is. Self-awareness and self-control. It's the ability to fully understand oneself and one's impact on others, and to use that information to manage one's self-productivity. So this is one of those aspects of leadership that is focused on you, like wholly on you. So your self-awareness and self-control. This is your ability to recognize when you're having a bad day. This is your ability to recognize when you've just said something you should not have said to someone that was mean. I mean, if you're oversharing, that's one thing, but if you're being mean, you know, I had an interesting conflict a while ago in the office, and the individual, it was really out of personality for them. They're not a confrontational kind of person. They are easygoing, wonderful to work with. It's not Pastor Dan or Pastor Joel, although they're wonderful to work with. But this individual was, I mean, we were talking about something, and they just kind of snapped. And I'm like, all right, well, if you want to fight, I can fight. But we didn't fight. And then, but about 5 minutes later, they came back and apologized, because they had enough emotional intelligence and self-awareness and self-control to recognize that they had not responded appropriately. And so it's a very healthy thing. This is what self-awareness and self-control. There are those that they react to everything, or they react over respond. You guys are familiar with this? They react and they do not acknowledge it. I mean, I have been yelled at by bosses for things that I did not do. I'm okay, I can take it, but you know, a lot of times all it takes is for someone to come back and just say, you know what, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that wasn't you. Or even if it was you, there is a better way I could have handled that. You know, an apology covers just so much. But if you're unaware of what you're doing, if you're not aware that you've done something, you're not going to come back. So think of the relationship with your spouse. So, guys, if you hear, "How are you?" and the response is, "I'm fine," we pursue that, because "I'm fine" doesn't necessarily mean I'm fine. You know, sometimes it does, but sometimes it's just it's something that needs to be pursued. But you have to be aware of these things, because if you are not aware of these, what happens? Well, it blows up, or depending upon the personality, it gets pressed down, it gets balled up, until eventually, then you poke a hole in that thing, and then it blows up. So self-awareness and self-control is managing your emotional state, okay? It's managing where you are emotionally, where you are personally, the way that you are connecting with those around you emotionally. So, I'm trying to remember what day it was. I think it was Wednesday. Wednesday, I woke up and I was grumpy about something. And so I got up, I came into the office for a brief period of time, and then I went off-site to work on my sermon, and also so I didn't have to talk to people, because if I was going to talk to people, it might not have gone well for them. But I understood this about myself. Wednesday, I was also supposed to fill out employee evaluations. I chose not to do that day. Because it would have been rough. It would have been rough for people. But I have to be aware of these things. You have to be aware of these things, okay? So you have to be aware of this. The next element of self-leadership, emotional intelligence, is empathy. The ability to understand the perspectives of others. Empathy is a wonderful thing of, can you put yourself in somebody else's shoes? Heather is wonderfully empathetic. Heather is wonderful at seeing other perspectives. My mom is excellent at that too, and sometimes it drives me nuts. Because sometimes I call my mom, I'm just trying to complain. And she goes, well, you know, they're probably, no, Mom, I'm just complaining. Just let me complain. Don't try and make me feel better, let me complain. So, empathy is the ability to understand the perspective of others. Social expertness. This is a tricky one for somebody that's low in emotional intelligence. It is the ability to build genuine relationships and bonds and express caring, concern, and conflict in healthy ways. In healthy ways. And you know, I think conflict is one of the ways that a low level of emotional intelligence really comes out. You know, the people I have the hardest time dealing with in conflict are passive aggressive people. I would rather we stand face to face and have a lengthy conversation as to what the problem is. I don't like when I leave a meeting. If we've had conflict in the middle of that meeting, my intention is to finish that conflict before we leave that meeting. I'll be more than happy to sit there and talk to you until we're both, all right, are we good? We understand, we're clear? Because this is so important in building relationships. Conflict is not a negative thing in relationships. Conflict is okay. Fighting, on the other hand, is not conflict. Fighting is just fighting. Because conflict has a healthy resolution or management ability to it. But fights, man, there's nothing healthy in a fight. And that's one of the things we talk about in conflict resolution is that healthy conflict resolution where you move from understanding what the problem is, understanding why this is a problem, and then moving to how do we move forward. That only works when you're dealing with somebody that wants a healthy conflict. Somebody that just wants to fight, it's just not going to work. There are some people that just, I have had the experience of working with people that they just want to argue.
Yes, they do.
They just want to argue with you. You can't. And most of the time that comes from some level of hurt, some level of developmental issue, some level of a challenge in their life. Passive aggressive is another one I have a hard time dealing with because when you leave the meeting, oh yeah, everything's great, and then 2 hours later you get an email that says what the issues are still and why they've quit. I have a hard time with that. And I think that deals a lot with emotional intelligence. And then the last element of emotional intelligence is self-motivation. Self-motivation, the driving factor behind why we do what we do. What motivates you? What drives you? What is the factor that keeps you engaged? What is it that helps you to continue to move forward? What is it that made you come here tonight? Is it just because you like to be around me? You like the sound of my voice? You find it soothing and relaxing? Is there something that in you that makes you desire to grow as a leader? What is it in you? What is it that causes you to want to do what you do? This is a self-motivating factor. All right, now before we bust into these anymore, here's what I want to do. Now, we got 1, 2. So if you're not finished with that, that's okay. But as you're adding up your scores, this should give you a good idea of what level you're at on your emotional intelligence. So how many of you feel like it's an accurate measure? I'm not going to ask you to tell me where you're at. How many of you feel like it's a relatively accurate measure? You miss subtle things, you miss obvious things. This is a good tool. Here's any evaluation tool that you fill out. Understand it's entirely subjective. You fill it out, so you're giving us your opinion. So how you do is entirely up to you, but it's to help you measure. What we don't do well is correlate all of these things together. So this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of where you might be starting from. So as we move through these 4 elements again, there's some questions that I really want you to answer for yourself. And this is really where I want you to grab a hold of it. We understand the benefit of self-awareness, or emotional intelligence. We understand the benefit of this. But these are some things that you need to start asking yourself to help yourself move forward. So self-awareness and self-control, as we look at that, these are questions that I want you to start asking. And this is where the life graph comes in. The pivot points in your life. So what developmental factors influence your feelings? What developmental factors influence your feelings? What gives you a sense of security? What gives you a sense of insecurity? What causes you to feel comfortable? What causes you to feel afraid? What causes you to feel nervous? So, do you know when you're in a bad mood? Apparently, I really wanted to know, do you know when you're in a bad mood? Because I typed it twice. Do you know when you're scared? Do you know when you're excited? Do you know when you're nervous? Do you know why these things happen in your life? Do you know why you get scared? Do you know why you get nervous? Do you know what causes you anxiety? If you don't know what it is, it becomes very hard for you to have an awareness and a control over it because you can't manage it. One of the things that we talked about last time is that when you can name something, you can steward it. If you can identify what a factor is, you can steward it when it happens. Does that mean you're not going to get angry again? Does that mean you're not going to get sad again? Does that mean you're not going to get nervous? No. But it helps you to work through it quicker because you've identified what the root is to that. So these are questions that you need to ask. Now, if you're writing Fast and Furious, you can, or once I'm done, I am going to put this, I'll put the PowerPoint up on the website so you can pull it down if you want. Empathy. Some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves in empathy. Can you see things from someone else's perspective? Why not? And then this is a great question. How do you argue? How do you argue? Do you argue from a position of listening to what somebody else is saying or simply drowning them out with volume? My ex-fiance, we got to the point where we yelling. We just yelled. Because that's the household that she grew up in. When they fought, they just yelled. They didn't listen to each other. Whoever was loudest at the end and kept on going the longest won. My family, we didn't really get in arguments per se. I never really considered raising my voice at my father because I knew it would result in being hit. And you certainly didn't raise your voice at mom because it would result in you being hit. But you know, I'm 38 years old. I've never seen my parents argue. They've never fought that I've seen. I'm sure they have fought. They've been together since my mom was in the third grade. So they've known each other. They haven't dating that long. That really doesn't make my dad sound good, really. Dating since my mom was in the 3rd grade. He was in the 5th grade. He was a fast move. No.
It won't matter after the golf story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, he's not going to see either one of those. So, but you know, they've been together a long time. But I'm sure they have fought. But I've never seen them argue. They've disagreed, but I've never seen them fight. But how do you approach conflict? Do you approach it from the perspective that somebody else's position might be valid, or do you just approach it from the perspective of it is there for me to destroy? Our ability to see somebody else's perspective really dictates how we approach conflict. That's so very important in empathy. Social expertness. Here are some questions that we need to ask ourselves. Do you care about those around you? Can you walk through a room? Pastor Glenn shares a story about one of his former children's pastors, and he said that she was so task-oriented, she could walk through the foyer of the church, and it could be full of people, and not once would she ask anyone, how you doing? Or even say hi, because she was focused. Are you that person that you can walk through a room full of people that you know and not once say hi or ask how somebody is doing? Do you care about those around you? How do you express it? How do you express it? If you have issues with intimacy, sometimes it's a misinterpreted word, but if you have issues with genuine relationship, there's a question that you need to ask yourself, why? There are some guys that they're uncomfortable when other guys give each other a hug, let alone when you touch them on the shoulder. They jump through the roof when you touch them on the shoulder. Whoa, don't get back. It's too comfortable. So it's like they go to the theater and they leave the seat between them. It's the we're not together seat. So, you know, it's that. So, but are you comfortable with intimacy? Are you comfortable with talking through things? Are you alone in a room full of people that you know? Can you walk through a room? So, if you start answering these questions, yes, you might need to really You might really need to evaluate what is it in your history, in your life graph, in your developmental period that have caused you to withdraw from people. Now, understand how close are your friends. I'm not saying you have to have 100 friends that you think are close friends. Otherwise, you're emotionally stunted. It really depends upon your personality. So like at a church social event, Heather and I are a great contrast. Heather wants to sit at a table and talk to one or two people. I want to talk to everybody. So it's actually the way we describe it is I'm going to go do the pastor thing, and I'm going to go talk to everybody. And she's okay. She's okay. I'm assuming she's okay with it. She hadn't really said otherwise. But but here's the question: do you have close friends? So now I talk to everybody, but I've only probably got about 3 friends that I would consider close, that I share real personal things with, and that's okay. You don't have to have 75 people that know every intimate detail of your life. That's when you don't have an appropriate level of boundary in your life. But understand, if you don't have anyone in your life, you really have to start understanding why do you have an issue with intimacy? Why do you have an issue with connection? Maybe there's something that happened in your life where a friend disappointed you, or somebody betrayed you, or somebody mistreated you, and it has caused you withdrawal. And if you don't identify those things, you can't develop that emotional intelligence. And it affects your heart. Remember, we start from the foundation of the heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. And if you can't identify these things, then it's something that is going to hinder your ability to grow as a leader. Emotional wake. That's you guys watched a boat go through the water, big ripples behind it. We know what caused the ripples in the water. Do you know what causes the ripples in the lives of the people around you? That's your emotional wake. These are the things that you need to be aware of. The last one was self-motivation, and that one that one builds off of what is the drive behind your efforts? And these are important questions to ask, because what is it that causes you to see? Some people think driven is the way to be, right? That if you're not laser focused on a goal, if you're not laser focused, you're not really doing. Okay, I'm a big guy on drive. I like to do things, but here's the question I want you to ask: are you worried about disappointing? Are you trying to measure up to somebody else's expectation? These aren't positive influences on being driven. I've got a friend that he works far too many hours, and so often his response is, I just don't want anyone to think I'm lazy. And he's being serious in a joking way, but you have to have the proper motivation. You know, if you're trying to be motivated by someone else's expectations, and you're constantly worried that you're going to disappoint that person, you're going to work yourself to a point of exhaustion. You're going to work yourself, and eventually that motivating factor burns out. That motivating factor doesn't carry on long term. If you can't be motivated by something internal to you, then external forces only last for so long. It's like those folks that they automatically quit a job if they get a job offer that offers more money. Money is a motivating factor for only so long. Eventually, if money is the only factor that gets you to work hard, eventually money is going to run out, because you're only worth so much. And no one ever pays us what we think we're worth. So understand, we have to understand our self-motivation and what is the driving factor behind what we do. If we do not understand that, we are going to be stuck at a level of trying to meet somebody else's expectations, of constantly feeling like we're a disappointment. And understand, does this make sense as to why this is so important to the heart of the leader? Because these are developmental issues. Emotional intelligence helps you to move beyond a developmental issue and steward it well. Are there